Imagine this. You go to the hospital for a medical emergency. You wait 12 hours for help. Two doctors see you and they still don't know what's wrong with you. And it's something that they shouldn't have missed, according to a lawsuit. Hi, I'm Atlanta News First investigative reporter Andy Perotti. Joining me now is my colleague, investigative reporter Sierra Cummings. How you doing, Sierra?
I am happy to be here. This is one of those heartbreaking stories, but it's one that should be told.
Yeah, when we saw the story as a team, it just kind of just pulled at your heart. Tell us a little bit more about this situation.
I've been making it a personal point to report more on healthcare, and I've been doing so for the last few months. And so this story actually came to me by way of a tip. Someone had saw some of our other reporting on a hospital in Clayton County and said, "Hey, I saw that you did this story. You might want to look at this verdict that just came down in March." And the verdict ended up being what lawyers called one of the largest malpractice ER settlements in Georgia history. So I looked through the case, and it centers on Jonathan Buckelew, who is living in Roswell with his family right now, and he has locked-in syndrome, where essentially he can't move his body from the nose down. He can't talk. He can communicate, though, through blinking. He blinks once for yes, twice for no, and he can also use a keypad, and to type on that keypad, he uses his nose. Here's Jonathan Buckelew's story. This happens often. In fact, one of the most common diagnoses doctors miss is a stroke. A Georgia court found two doctors failed to diagnose a stroke, damaging an Atlanta family forever.
We do work really hard to keep at least 2 months ahead.
Jack Buckelew gives us a tour of his garage.
And as you can see,
not just any supplies,
it's a lot of stuff.
An inventory of life-saving medical tools.
We created an ICU, honestly.
For his son, Jonathan. October 2015, during a chiropractic appointment, Jonathan became dizzy and disoriented, over time becoming less responsive. He was rushed to North Fulton Hospital's emergency room. There, two doctors missed key signs, failing to properly diagnose him. A court found the two doctors, an ER physician and a radiologist, were grossly negligent. That the ER doctor did not mention to the consulting neurologist Jonathan had seen a chiropractor earlier, that he experienced a second seizure-like event, and that the radiologist missed information on a scan. The chiropractor, the hospital, and other clinical staff were not found liable in this case. But Jonathan was having a stroke, one that went undiagnosed and untreated for 12 hours. It was nearly a decade ago, but ever since, Jonathan lives like this.
You count on hospitals, you count on emergency rooms, you count on specialists, you count on tests, you count on all of this stuff. And treatments never really came until way, way, way too late.
As a result, he now has locked-in syndrome, a neurological disorder where a person is conscious and aware, but unable to move or speak due to complete paralysis of nearly all muscles except the eyes.
Just a lot of pain. It's in spite of his spirit, which keeps us going, because he wants to do things, he wants to go places. It just breaks our heart to see him like he is.
Jonathan is an adult, but even at 34 years old, his family and team of nurses care for him 24/7. He cannot talk, but he can communicate by blinking and using his nose to type on a keypad.
There's some days where he's like, pull the plug. So those are the tough days.
But this day is not like that.
Hi, Jonathan.
Mom says Jonathan wants to engage with us.
Did you like the orange chicken? Oh.
One blink means yes.
He is fun. The nurses really love him.
We love Jonathan.
They all say he's just
He's
best
the
to work for.
This is Jonathan's exercise room.
Their entire home reconfigured to accommodate Jonathan's needs, from his bedroom to the physical therapy area to the main living space, which includes his favorite spot, in front of the fish tank, mesmerized by the motion. Expenses covered by what Jonathan's attorney says is one of the largest ER malpractice verdicts in Georgia history.
Jonathan was having a stroke when he came to the hospital, and they missed it. The people who were responsible for reading the radiographs, the CT, MRI, misread it. The ER doctor saw that this patient was having all these signs and symptoms of stroke and never called a stroke alert. And they didn't follow their policies and procedures.
A jury agreed, awarding the family $75 million. When the ER doctor appealed, an appellate court affirmed the ruling against him. He's appealing again to the Georgia Supreme Court, which has not decided if it'll take the case. The other doctor filed an appeal, but later withdrew.
We know that doctors are going to make mistakes. So it's critical that the hospital develop policies and procedures and protocols that will mitigate or reduce those mistakes.
30 to 50% of the time, minor strokes are currently missed, according to Johns Hopkins research. That same data found overall diagnostic errors, known as any missed, incorrect, or delayed diagnosis, affect 12 million Americans, 1/3 of people medically harmed as a result. People like Jonathan, who once played nearly every sport, always active, but now his body may never move on its own again.
I really feel like there's no real justice for somebody who lost everything. For the most part, lost every aspect of his life. I guess it's way past the anger, and the frustration. Just really focusing on, what can we do? How can we keep him as happy as possible? How can we give him the best life possible?
At the time of this incident, Tenet Healthcare owned North Fulton Hospital. The company did not respond for comment, but again, the hospital was not found liable in this case. You can watch this full investigation on AtlantaNewsFirst.com.
Sierra, this is one of the most emotional stories that I've seen you produce. I can't imagine living in Jonathan's body, being coherent of everything around you and not being able to move or communicate. How's the family doing now? What kind of resources are they now able to get that they previously couldn't afford?
It was such an inspiring time to hang out with that family, because that's essentially what we had to do. We wanted to understand Jonathan's day in and day out, what it looks like for him, what it looks like for his family, what it looks like for the caregivers. So me and my photojournalist, Eric Carlton, we spent most of the day with them. We wanted to see, what does his bedroom look like? What does the bathroom look like? What does his play area look like? But as you mentioned, Jonathan, he's an adult, he's 34, and he's fully aware of everything that's happening around him. And he's very intelligent, because we know he has these conversations via the keypad with his family. But to not be able to actually move in the way he once did. We mentioned in the story, he's played nearly every sport. He used to ski. He was an incredible skier, and now he can't move on his own. So it really is heartbreaking for that family. Is something so powerful that Dad said in the story, is that there really is no justice for someone who's lost nearly every aspect of their life. So at that point, realizing this is their son's reality, they just wanted a level of accountability. And so in come that civil suit. At this point, that case has gone through most of the civil process. We know that one of the doctors appealed, and an appellate court ruled again in that family's favor. And it's our understanding that that doctor is trying to appeal to Georgia Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court hasn't decided here in Georgia if they're going to take on that case. But ultimately, they do have a lot of resources, or planning at least to have many more resources, because of that $75 million verdict. He's got round-the-clock care. He's got incredible nurses. The nurses love Jonathan, and the nurses have become a part of the family. So if anything, it feels like the Buckelews have grown by the workers that are there around the clock, helping Jonathan and the parents.
Any additional response from the hospital? I know there's been a change in ownership while you were doing the story, doctor
Yeah.
at some point.
And that is important to point out because at the time that this happened, this was back in 2015, North Fulton Hospital was owned by Tenet Healthcare. And so it was known as North Fulton Hospital now. But if you Google search or you try to figure out what hospital is North Fulton, present day, today in 2025, it's owned by Wellstar, and it's called Wellstar North Fulton Medical Center. So there has been that change in ownership over the last few years. We reached out to Wellstar and they pointed us to Tenet. They're like, hey, we weren't the owners at the time, so you really should go through Tenet Healthcare. We reached out to Tenet Healthcare repeatedly. We did not hear back from them for comment on this story, but it is important to point out through this entire legal process, the only two people found liable were those two doctors. The hospital was not found liable in this case.
Sarah, what do you hope people take away from this story? Because as you know, hospitals are run by humans. Humans make mistakes. Things are going to happen. I know there's a difference between a mistake versus negligence, but what do you hope people take away?
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between a mistake, negligence, and malpractice, and that's what this lawsuit was about. You raised a great point. The attorney said, we know that doctors are going to make mistakes. If you're like me, you love Grey's Anatomy, you watch it for all the things that goes on in the hospital, but you really get to see, okay, these doctors are just people, and people make mistakes, and that attorney said that. But what's important is to make sure there are policies in place and that the folks at the hospital are following the right policies. And at the heart of this civil case, the attorneys were able to prove, because now two courts have agreed with them, that these doctors didn't follow policy. It boils down to a level of communication. We mentioned in the story that Jonathan had been at a chiropractor before this incident. That's a huge thing, because had that been communicated to the doctor there, the attorneys say they would have immediately consulted a neurologist. Had the neurologist known that he'd come from a chiropractor, maybe that neurologist would have put two and two together and said, hey, this might be a stroke, because we know chiropractic visits, depending on what happens in that session, could lead to some kind of stroke or aneurysm. And so this does boil down to, were the policies followed? And in this case, the attorneys feel as if they have proven, and the courts seem to agree that they have proven that those policies were not followed. So I think that's the big takeaway here. We know people will make mistakes, but there should be policies and procedures in place to at least mitigate that to a certain degree. And also, just another big point to our audience, a stroke we found in our research and also included in this story some data on it, but a stroke is one of those common diagnostic errors, especially when there's so much ambiguity. Like, you come into the hospital and you're just experiencing dizziness, or you're fatigued, or you're incoherent. That's vague enough that maybe a doctor wouldn't immediately guess this is a stroke. And so we know strokes are one of those common cases where there is a misdiagnosis or a diagnostic error. And so it is important to advocate for yourself and to make sure you have family or someone there with you that can be your advocate.
Sarah, you said you got this story from a tip. How do people contact you?
Social media. My social media is just my first and last name, Sierra Cummings. You can't miss it on X, formerly known as Twitter, Facebook, also Instagram, but also my email. It's just my first dot my last name, Sierra.Cummings@WANF.com. And I try to be really responsive, because I think they're really important stories to be told, and we get them from the community.
Yeah, and if you just heard Siri talking, apparently Siri sounds a lot like Sierra. So I apologize about that. Sierra, thank you so much for breaking down this important investigation, this really important story. You can watch more of Sierra's stories on AtlantaNewsFirst.com or anywhere where you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time.